This is the Patriots Prayer Podcast. It's a tremendous show, one of the greatest shows in the history of the world.
This is Bryson Gray, and you are watching the Patriots Prayer.
PPN, you're doing the right thing.
On the Patriots Prayer Network. Thank you all.
Falling, they all say, gather the faithful now and pray. The Patriots Prayer. The Patriots Prayer. All the wicks are trimmed, oil is filled to the brim. Haven't changed yet somehow. I'm the radical now. America's falling, they all say. Gather the faithful now and pray. The Patriots.
What's going on, Patriots? And I hope everyone is having a great Sunday morning or afternoon, depending on what side of the coast you're on. But, guys, we had a great show for you today. Jim Pfaff, president of the Conservative Caucus, is here with us today. And with so much going on in the world, and every day he's bringing a new thing on the news, there's always a different headline. There's always something going on. This should be very, very interesting with so much going on in the world of Doge. The Ukraine situation is ever evolving and changing. NATO, there are just so many topics to delve into. And with that, I'm just going to bring up Jim. And Jim, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, sir?
Very good. Very, very good. It looks like we're winning every day. There's like a different victory, a different win, a different. I've never seen a presidency. I've never seen in my entire life. Have I ever seen this happen? This is
I
amazing.
might have gotten to the place where I'm tired of winning, but actually not. Very, very happy about it. And, it really, this is an evidence of a principle of how leadership really works, how courage in leadership is absolutely necessary. Mm-hmm. And by the way, a reminder that, imperfect people can do fantastic things if they're just willing to press in, not give up, understand what the foundations and the principles are, and then act upon it.
Isn't that amazing? Because the pushback that he received, the onslaught of false charges and allegations, and now we know U.S. aid money was used to pay media companies, and this is somehow connected to the whistleblower accounts that were used under false impeachments, and just all the just tremendous amount of waste and fraud and abuse. And it seems to me like there are several things, and I think it was highlighted during his address to Congress the other day, that are just not political, and they would just be right or wrong on the surface. $59 million or some crazy number for an Arabian Sesame Street, 300-year-old people in Social Security. I mean, you would think that both sides, if they were truly trying to help the American people, would just be happy about this. But these guys couldn't even find themselves clapping for a kid who overcame cancer. I mean, we're at a day and an age where divisiveness is a detriment to the American people, who both sides of this, no matter what side they're supposed to be on, are supposed to be serving us. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening. I mean, what's your take on it?
Oh, listen, I spent around 8 years on Capitol Hill as the chief of staff for a couple of different congressmen. I've worked in and around it for many years, 30 years of doing politics in general. Mm-hmm. It's a reminder that Reagan was very wise to note that politics is the world's second oldest profession and has many of the characteristics of the oldest profession.
I'm going to use that one.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, it's really bad. It should give everyone a really good understanding of how bad things can go. We have been living, people who are in the baby boomer generation or the Gen X generation were under the pretense that, yeah, imperfect characters in Washington, D.C., nothing, is ever perfect, and we got to do politics or whatever. But yet we still have this foundation of the country and the good of what America was and what it had become. And the reality is, for the last 50, 60 years, that's just mostly not been the case at all. And it's gotten much worse in the 21st century. You had at first George W. Bush, who led us into a war that was unnecessary. We did need to react to 9/11, but we did not need to go into these forever wars we were doing.
Yeah.
But to supposedly secure us against the obvious wisdom of Ben Franklin, who had said that those who want to give up essential freedom for liberty will have neither.
Deserve neither.
We went ahead and did the Patriot Act to hue and cry. At that time, interestingly, mostly from Democrats and the left. Not enough Republicans were going against it because they were going along with the crowd. But
everyone signed it overnight without even reading it. No one even read it. It was signed by morning. John Ashcroft wrote that. And I mean, it was just sitting around. It was legislation that was pre-written, that was sitting there, and they were waiting for a moment. And when it came out that think tank, that new Project for New American Century, which was comprised of Condoleezza Rice, Dick Cheney, and others, pre-wrote that saying, hey, we need a new Pearl Harbor type event to take place before people will accept this. Mm-hmm. And then that happens. I mean, it leaves a lot of questions on the table.
It's a reminder that the big events in the world, without having any pushback, coordinated or otherwise, can lead to the most insane things that happen in government. So after Patriot Act, the Fourth Amendment of the United States and a few of the other amendments are eviscerated. Like the Fourth Amendment's eviscerated right now in this country. Yeah. Anytime the government, even to this day, even in this Trump administration.
You're talking about 702, the use of 702?
Yeah. Well, the Patriot Act and then the 702 aspect of it. It's eviscerated the Fourth Amendment. I mean, the Patriot Act set up this. A lot of people forget this. Admiral Poindexter, you remember John Poindexter, former CIA head in the Bush administration. He had been talking shortly after 9/11 about building these massive computer systems so we could store data and make sure we could get to it to try to go after terrorists. And listen, we got to go after terrorists. Obviously, you have to do the work to protect the United States, but he was talking about that long before the deep implementation of the Patriot Act. They were looking towards this for some time, and so everything about our lives is now subject to government perusal, literally. Everything. And so then you go into, we're going to have a permanent majority, a permanent Republican majority. So he and Bush and Karl Rove said, and they passed No Child Left Behind, and they passed Medicare Part D. Mm-hmm. In other words, they expanded government. In 2000 and 2001, a lot of people don't know this, but the Office of Management and Budget was predicting that our then $5+ trillion debt would be paid off by 2013, and here we are. Just about to get to $39 trillion in debt. Then you go to Barack Obama, who weaponized government. And a lot of what we're seeing with the Doge thing right now, that is Barack Obama implementing community organizing in government. That's literally what it is. Community organizing started with Saul Alinsky back in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s. And what they did is they would gather up large groups of people, intimidate primarily in the beginning banks, but other corporate entities. And they would put them in fear that they were going after them in public and so forth. And they would literally steal their money. I mean, they make them write checks to them so that they could go do what they wanted to do. That's the early form of what we're seeing now happening in government with Doge, to the point now where Stacey Abrams literally just recently, this last week on television, admitted that this $2 billion that were going up to her thrown together nonprofit organizations was going to move money into the hands of potential voters, literally, that she could, in the long-term effect, and move people towards more Democrat votes. That's literally what that $2 billion was about. Of course, it gets much worse than that. We're finding out a whole lot more. To close on this, when I was early on observing what's going on in 2016, and I supported Ted Cruz at first, but I did very happily come around to Donald Trump. But people in the Cruz camp would argue with me, and I knew Ted. I'd worked on Capitol Hill. People had come to me and all upset about Trump. And I said, listen, if this guy becomes president, he's going to kick over the trash cans in Washington, D.C. and reveal what's really going on there. That literally is happening right now. And it should concern every American, and it should cause every patriot and every person who cares about what this country is about to stand with Donald Trump, even when you're in some disagreement, and go ahead and have the disagreement if you think that it's right, but stand with the guy to finish this process. We need this to happen. We need much more than what we've seen so far. It's the only hope for the future of our country, in my opinion.
I think that toward the end of the election cycle, when we saw Dick Cheney and others on what we thought were conservatives, right? Well, I didn't. I knew better, president of the CFR while he was vice president. There was a lot of craziness there. I mean, the average American doesn't know the layers. They don't dig too deep. They listen to the mainstream media, and that in itself is its own problem, because when I had conversation with JD Vance in Atlanta, this is what I told him. I said two things. If you guys want to investigate anybody, investigate the media. Find out who's paying them, because those are the people that are causing the division, because they're not reporting the truth. And I would love to know why they're so obviously ignoring the truth. And it seems to be they're ignoring it in favor of a left who is obviously wrong. Boys are in girls' sports. I mean, now they're trying to legislate language. I have to call someone this, or have to agree that they're that. We're being censored on the internet for telling the truth. If we don't want to take a vaccine, we lost our jobs or got kicked out of the military, or all of these things. And it's just not the America that many of the people were led to believe that were in Generation X and before was America. We have a whole different way that we see our country, and a way that we see the heritage and the culture of this country than probably Gen X or Gen Z do. And to a point, maybe even millennials, depending on the culture of their own households. But that's quickly changing. And what scares me is it takes about a generation or two of indoctrination of the children to forever change the landscape of what our culture is. How do we combat that? How do we win the culture war?
Well, first of all, of course, we're here. I'm going to tell you what the foundation is, in my opinion, of that, to that answer, and then get to more down to earth practical things. But in a broad sense, since we're the Patriot Prayer program right here, Ephesians 6 applies. Like, a lot of people don't haven't, and a lot of theologians, in fact, haven't interpreted Ephesians 6 as it relates to these really spiritual forces that affect governments. I mean, all of that, put on the armor of God and this sort of thing. Because of the war of principalities, powers, and darkness, it says the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but spiritual and against principality. But that doesn't mean we don't do things here on earth. But we do have to start with prayer. We do need to for those who want to follow Christ, want to do what's good and advance God's kingdom, they have to get their personal house in order. You need to make sure that you as an individual recognize the grace of God that is absolutely necessary to be able to operate in life.
Yeah, to quote Jordan Peterson, make your bed or clean your room, he says a lot. and then go tell everyone else how they're.
That's right. Now
Yes,
the next step is now we have to get into action as you're working on that process, which is a process for all of us till we die. But while you're doing that, you need to be firm in your opposition to what's going on here, because it is a really evil thing that has been going forth. If
Yes,
there's
it is.
anything that a politician says, by the way, Republican or Democrat,
exactly
that
right.
is self-contradictory, that misrepresents the causes and the effects of things, then you need to combat it aggressively with the answer as to why it's wrong. So the most obvious example is this transgender issue. The very idea that you would have a Supreme Court justice who in testimony would not be able to define what a woman is.
Miss Brown, you're referring to Miss Brown. This
Ketanji
is the
Brown
same
Jackson.
one who apologized to the family of a pedophile for having to put him in jail.
And listen, it's absurd on its face. It's not just that there's a political opposition to who she is because of the political stand that she takes. It's far worse than a mere political problem.
It's an obvious wrong.
An obvious, purposeful misunderstanding about how of the science. I mean, if we don't take any spiritual aspect of it, the science is obviously wrong. But when you get into the spiritual, cultural, personal aspect of this, it is fundamentally wrong and antithetical to truth. You have to aggressively oppose that. It is worth opposing on that basis. And unfortunately, politicians keep it at the political level only. And we obviously need the political opposition, but we got to go far beyond that. Ketanji Brown Jackson represents, and many others obviously, represent something that is not just antithetical to political reality, not just antithetical to the realities of what the American experiment was entirely meant to be. It goes way beyond that. It's antithetical to anthropology. It's antithetical to history. It's antithetical to what makes culture strong and hopefully good, or at least good in the world's eyes compared to others, and makes it successful. We've been a successful nation, not because we've been perfectly good or without sin or without error, but we have been a successful nation because we threw off those shackles and chains of stupidity that every human being is subject to. And we worked hard to go away from what we knew were the errors of mankind.
Yeah, they like to indict us on our past sins without taking into account, yes, there were obviously sins passed in this country. However, there's always been an opposition to those things. Benjamin Franklin said that slavery was a stain on the soul of this country. We were always fighting against those things that they're obviously trying to use against us, but they're doing it in sort, I like to refer to it as political judo, trying to use our own weight against us. And they just don't get it right 90% of the time, because as often as there has been a wrong in this country and there's been sin in this country, there have been people fighting against it and trying to correct it and further us. And we have came a long way. But this current movement on the left, this movement toward Marxism and socialism is devolving into the things that particular political party used to stand against. They used to be the party of free speech, for as much as I disagree with other tenets that they had, but free speech was fundamental to them. I mean, you heard Obama give a full-throated rebuke to illegal immigration, and I mean a full speech. And we need to stop this, and we need to protect the American worker. And for a few short years later, to have them take the complete opposite as their stance on this thing, just to be antithetical to anything we stand for. As Dan Bongino likes to call it, they're the anti. Doesn't matter what we believe or stand for or fight for, they are going to take the opposite position. It's cold outside. Well, it's hot. It doesn't matter what we say. They're going to say the opposite. And it's just not a climate that I want to be in, as far as I don't see it helping the American people in the long. It seems like they're not trying to serve anyone but themselves. But I digress. Let's move on to more pressing topics. Now, NATO is it seems to be sounding like a dirty word more and more lately surrounding this Ukraine situation. And a lot of people don't understand that this Ukraine situation was born out of an agreement that we made with Mikhail Gorbachev years ago about not moving the red line any closer. We tore down the wall, and here we go, continuously doing things that we said we wouldn't do. This absolutely made that, and I'm not, believe me, and I know people on the left are going, he's a Putin puppet. No, this is just true on its face. We did things that we should not have done as NATO, as Americans. Obama told Ukraine to disarm and we'll protect them, and they weren't members of NATO. But what people don't understand is there's more to this story. And also, I don't believe Zelensky is who he tries to appear to be. Matter of fact, he is more like Putin than anyone. In fact, canceling elections in his own country, locking up his political opposition, banning political opposition parties. He killed a U.S. journalist, Gonzalo Lira, while he was over there reporting on what took place. And yet we give this guy hundreds of billions of dollars. He can't account for it. His wife's posing on the front of, I think it was Vogue magazine, and $10,000 dresses with fancy sports cars behind them, but they're losing people on the front lines to the tune of thousands a day while trying to fight a propaganda war to make it sound like they're winning. I often tell people that this war is if the United States went to war with Florida. I mean, that's essentially what Russia fighting Ukraine is. So I think in light of that, I think that Putin has to be fighting with one arm behind his back, or this would be long since over. And he's continually called for peace talks. But our media says Russia like it's a dirty word, like he's the boogeyman. And I think this is someone who NATO needs to be the boogeyman to sustain their own existence. What do you think?
Well, all the way back to George Washington in his farewell address, he said, "Beware of foreign entanglements." I'm paraphrasing there. Mm-hmm. So we put together these organizations, and how wise is it for us to do that? Well, in a Cold War world, it seemed really useful to have a NATO to oppose Soviet Russia.
Absolutely.
That was intending to expand the idea of communism worldwide. Okay, that seems reasonable, and we can have an argument about how useful NATO was then. Probably useful, but when the Berlin Wall fell down, the need for NATO dramatically decreased. Not that you couldn't argue for its existence at that time, but there was one thing that was very interesting, is that even going back to Boris Yeltsin, who attempted to embrace the West, attempted to bring Russia back into the, as a colleague nation of free countries, however imperfectly, we eschewed that, which gets into the basic problem we have right now in our foreign policy as it relates to Russia. We still are in a Cold War era of thinking. We're still thinking like this is 1950, and Soviet Russia is threatening Eastern European countries and trying to take them over. And listen,
I see no evidence for that.
Yeah, no, we don't. I mean, but someone's going to bring up, once I make that point, the immediate thing is going to be, but what about what happened in the Donbass? Listen, it's really complicated. And I do not think that Vladimir Putin is some angel out there. He's far from it. I think the guy is actually filled with a lot of evil. And I think that he evilly went into Ukraine, notwithstanding the argument that he would make himself about why it was his right to do that. Mm-hmm. That was absolutely wrong. But what we have done in this situation is we've entangled ourselves so deeply into a situation that has caused so much harm and the lives of hundreds of thousands of people because of the manner in which we went about it. And I put most of the blame, not as much on NATO, although I think I have some real questions about how we involve ourselves with NATO right now and what the long term should be there. Mm-hmm. But you got to put it far more on Joe Biden, who comes into office under question, in my opinion, and has this idea on the international stage of really causing more harm than good. Like, he has aligned himself not only with the military industrial complex, he had aligned himself as well to much of the corruption that takes place around the world. And we know precisely in Ukraine that he was directly involved in corruption there through Hunter Biden. We kept saying it for a long time. The proof is in the pudding now. We know for certain it was there. And we allowed the media in this country to push back like that didn't exist. We were allowing the World Economic Forum to make the arguments that it made about the engagement of countries on the international stage and what they should be doing in their politics for far too long without enough pushback. So that's the foundation of how we got here, in my opinion. And we do need to be extracting ourselves from this. And Donald Trump has taken the right path, in my opinion.
And just on the Biden thing for a second, it just the obvious wrongs. Well, he had 170 SAR reports, suspicious activity reports, for those of you who don't know. And those SAR reports were largely believed to come from the Privat bank that was in the Ukraine. There was a leaked phone call between Poroshenko, who was the previous Ukrainian president prior to Zelensky, and then later a leaked phone call with Biden and Zelensky, where he stated, essentially, he said in the phone call, he said, take over the bank. And he referenced Igor Kolomoisky, who was the owner of Burisma Holdings, who owned the Burisma Energy, where Hunter Biden famously worked and got paid somewhere to $50,000 a month. And they wanted to go public they wanted to go on the New York Stock Exchange. And that was the whole deal that was going on there. Enter Daddy into the scene, who gets the prosecutor fired, and Poroshenko said he did nothing wrong. I did this essentially at the behest of Biden. But these phone calls that were leaked were telling, because in the phone call he said, close that bank. He wanted to try to hide the evidence of the SAR reports, I believe, because he said it'll be good for your financial as well as your physical security. So I take that as a threat. Like, Biden said this and I have the phone call, but he said this to the leader of another country. So this guy's got 20 shell companies. His grandchildren are getting paid from adversarial countries. He receives 16 of 17 payments from Romania. I mean, these are big red flags and very much evidence that he was extremely corrupt. And let's not forget, early on, Biden, the one that was, author of the 94 crime bill, the guy who gave that long speech about how we get out of Iraq and why it's going to take a year and that we get our people out of there before the military. He said a lot of things back in those days that I can actually agree with. I can say here with no problem, with all humility, that I agreed with those things that he said. But it seems to me that the guy we ended up with for the last 4 years or so there is not the same person that he was in years previous. And it looks more and more every day. And there were reports, Jesse Peters did one, where he basically proclaimed that Biden was compromised on a very high level and therefore maybe couldn't make a lot of his own decisions. What do you think about that?
Well, listen, whatever public persona of Joe Biden anyone sees now, in the past, or even further beyond what you were just describing, is always fake. Joe Biden is a liar. Like, he is a proven liar. Everything that he does is merely for political benefit. And I'm not certain, he's one of those politicians, rare politicians, where I think everything he ever said was a lie. It was whatever he needed to say at that time. Now, politicians do this in a general sense, but not all politicians lie all the time.
Yeah, he was on steroids with it.
Does.
He was definitely on some steroids with it. He desegregated something. He was in the civil rights movement. He was everywhere. He went and visited who was it? The African leader. I forget. Mandela. Right. He did all of these things that never happened.
Yeah.
I mean, and then he made such obvious, terrible remarks about, corn pop and all these other weird stories, shaking hands with people that weren't there. But the thing that really concerns me is that Tim Walz, Kamala Harris, a lot of the leaders that were around him and White House staff knew how bad his dementia was. And it was brought up on the laptop, which was made public. Anyone can go download the contents of that thing. And Hunter Biden's having a conversation with Jim, his uncle, James Biden. And he says, well, how bad's your father's dementia now? And Hunter responds, well, he's got the Secret Service with him and they know his home address. That's about all they're good for. That's telling. But what's concerning to me, the most concerning, is that the media kept saying over and over again, there's no evidence of any of his wrongdoing, of his obvious mental decline while he was in office. And my question is, who was running the country?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of us knows for sure. It was obviously all the people in his staff. I mean, it was Anthony Blinken, and by the way, it was Susan Rice and Barack Obama to a certain degree.
Yeah,
I don't know the absolute depth of their involvement, but what I do know is there were reports of people going back and forth between Obama's house in Kalamara area of DC. They were constantly going in and out. And I mean, some of that you'd say, well, yeah, obviously. I mean, Biden had been his vice president, and so therefore they had similar staff, and they probably knew whatever. Yeah, you can say that. Biden or Obama had input in the Biden administration in some form or fashion. We don't know precisely what at this stage. I don't know if we ever will, but I guarantee you that happened because there's so much extension to Obama policies, and the people on Biden's staff were so similar to people who had been on Obama's team and his administration. So the problem with this, though, isn't entirely, it is partly entirely that Obama had influence there. The problem with this is a way of thinking that is evil, that is un-American. The Democrats are not an American party right now in any shape, form, or fashion. And I'm not casting this out at all Democrat voters. A lot of Democrat voters are people who want to believe in this country and want to do good things. There's a large portion of them that don't. But the reality is the problem of the Democrat Party is elected officials and leaders in that party and the constituent corporate and wealthy people that are connected to that party. They do not have the American ideal in mind. They don't care about the American ideal. That they think like people in the World Economic Forum, whether or not they're part of that, and they probably are, because none of that has anything to do with liberty. The kind of liberty that we eventually developed in Western civilization, informed by the Judeo-Christian ethic, with some foundation in ideas of Greek liberty and early Roman Republic ideas of liberty. We fine-tuned this. We cleansed it properly through the Judeo-Christian ethic, and we implemented it here in the United States to great effect through the 19th century and the early 20th century, until we came upon this progressive experiment that sort of began in the Teddy Roosevelt administration, but came with haste through Wilson and FDR and LBJ and on to the day. And now we're on the back end of that experiment. What we're fighting for in this country right now is a reassertion of the American experiment, which a lot of Americans haven't seen a lot of. They've learned about it. They have positive thoughts about it, evidenced by this last election with Donald Trump getting elected. And we have to, kind of reinform ourselves in a new and fresh way why the Constitution was so important. You know, with all of our imperfections, like it's the problem with the recent wokeism and leftist DEI, ESG, all these ideologies that get so angry and expresses so much anger towards Christians and Christian thinking. They're doing exactly the same things they misunderstand that it's a basic human error, basic human sin and problems that causes this. The founding fathers knew this. They knew how imperfect our country was by keeping slavery in place and a few other things. But what they understood was this, what James Madison talked about in the Federalist Papers number 51, where he said, if men were angels, there'd be no need for government. If angels governed us, you know, everything would be perfect. They strictly limited government purposefully because of their acknowledgement and understanding of the basic sin of mankind. I say often that 6,000 years of recorded human history proves the radical corruption of mankind. Like none of us is immune from this potential problem. I have seen people go into Washington, D.C. that were fantastic legislators in their states, that were excellent in standing against what's wrong and for freedom, come to Washington, D.C., and then suddenly shift and go the wrong direction.
We've all seen that.
And this is what we're fighting for. We're only ever good because we work really hard at it and put aside our constituent nature and rebuild in ourselves a new nature that looks towards good. And if we cannot get back to that in a wholesale way in this country where it overwhelms the evil that we're fighting against, it's going to be hard to recover the American dream for the future.
And you would think that they would be more accommodating when Trump is exposing, Doge is exposing obvious, just completely obvious wrongs and waste, fraud, and abuse that but they're pushing back against it. And you would think that there would be some bipartisanship, but the left have shifted so far to the left and radical. And then we have those wolves in sheep clothing in our own party. That we're obviously dealing with as well, and that whole uniparty faction. And I brought it up before, but toward the end of that election, when you saw Dick Cheney and others, you know, Dick Cheney used to be seen as Darth Vader, the ultimate conservative, the right wing, the far right wing guy. And what we saw, I think, was a demasking of something that always was a trick that was played on the American people to make us believe there was a right and a left. And I think with the resurgence of someone like Donald Trump, who came along at this point in history, was definitely, in my opinion, God inspired, because for the longest time we had the George Bushes of the world and the establishment who were pushing legislation, and they got on camera and they said all the right things and they sounded very conservative, but they were globalists and they pushed a globalist agenda. And in fact, I tell people often, if you take a look at Barack Obama on paper, right? Don't listen to anything he's saying. Just look at him on paper. The expansion of this, expanding the NDAA, continuing the Patriot Act, the Victory Act, dropping a bomb, every 20 minutes or so while he was in office. He looks like George Bush on paper. They're really not much different. On paper and legislatively, they're not much different. And the idea that we had two people arguing that they were different parties and all that at that time, I believe, was a trick being played in front of the eyes of Americans. And why they're all upset is because we finally have somebody who is truly different, which I believe inspire other politicians who truly want to be different to actually come out and be that true constitutional conservative.
Well, you know, Chuck Colson wrote a book called Kingdoms in Conflict back in his late 80s or early 90s. I can't remember the exact date of it, but he, in his foreword to the book, or his prequel to the book, he talked about, because this is the formation of the Christian right? And he, that in that era, and he was envisioning an avowedly Christian president, because everyone in the Christian right wanted that. And he explained a situation, which I won't go into the depths of, where the guy really screwed up. Okay, he claimed Christian faith. He seemed like a Christian guy. Well, by the way, that got fulfilled in George W. Bush, and it was an abject failure. There was very little in the Bush administration that was any good at all. He did do the tax cuts, great. But really, seriously, other than that, 9/11 set the stage for something far worse, and he failed the test. So I say all that to say this. When people are evaluating those who get elected, it's one thing to want them to be of a Christian character and an avowedly Christian character. That's one thing. But you have to judge them by the actions they undertake while they are in elective office.
Yeah.
And I have said, when I left Capitol Hill in 2018, late 2018, and I knew or was acquainted with every avowedly Christian Republican congressman at that time. And I have to say that the majority of them, as I describe it, voted like Satan. And why do I say that? Because these are people, if they're claiming Christian faith, know that God's word is immutable, that God himself is providential over the universe, that he judges nations, that he turns the heart of the king, that literally he is in control of all things, that his stated law is not to be disputed under any circumstances. Just the 10 commandments, and of course you expand beyond that. Immutable, not changeable. They say they believe that if they're claiming Christian faith, but they can't take a pretty close to perfect document, the Constitution, that does not contradict God's law in any way that I have ever noticed. And I'm open to someone making that argument, but I haven't seen it. Okay.
I'm with you.
And they can't stand by the Constitution. If they're not voting by the Constitution, if every one of their political efforts is to change unconstitutional laws, knowing that we can't win everything, but being dog determined to get there and restrain this government back to constitutional guidelines, then they're voting like Satan. They're antinomians in the political sense. There's a theological construct called antinomianism. And it's a movement that has popped up from time to time in the 2,000 years of church history that says, no. The Old Testament is not what we go by. We're in the new age. Whatever. No, it's a false heresy, frankly.
It is.
Law matters. And if you claim to be a Christian, if you claim, while not being a Christian, to honor Christian principles, as even some of our founders did. By the way, not all of our founders were truly Christians, but they honored Scripture as a good moral guideline. If you say you believe that and you do not push back against most of what we're doing in this government, and I'm going to give you an example here. This just recently happened, and it's not being talked about a lot. When the Senate was considering their version of this continuing resolution that needs to be passed at the end of this next week, in March 14th, Rand Paul offered an amendment that cut spending in the United States by $1.5 trillion.
He's done it before. Yeah.
Now, but this is what's interesting. We just went through an election where Donald Trump won a mandate pushing towards reducing government, where the Doge effort has been laid out over these last few weeks to applause almost by the American public. I mean, 70+% of Americans are endorsing what Doge is doing.
Absolutely.
And 29 GOP senators could not bring it upon themselves to vote for Rand Paul's thing, even if they disagreed with it on a basis that they could not get the political will in their mind and understand that the whole movement is going in that direction, that the American public wants this, and they still vote against it. That's evidence
that tells you who they are.
We have in DC.
Yeah, that tells you exactly who they are. I mean, I remember seeing, maybe about a month or two, not even 2 months ago, there was a gentleman, they did an undercover, like, James O'Keefe style sting on this guy, and he admitted to getting a mandate from the White House or the administration, more or less, to give away $20 billion as fast as he could before Donald Trump had a chance to get in there and cut the purse strings. So they were just dumping money into these organizations as fast as they could. And he said they had to be non-governmental NGOs, right? So that way the government couldn't just go take the money back.
Oh, it's far worse than that. Lee Zeldin's the one that brought this up, and they were literally describing it as throwing gold bars off the Titanic.
Exactly. That's the one I'm talking about.
And they threw the money into a bank account. It hasn't even been fully distributed yet. Listen, with the corruption and fraud behind what was taking place there is absurd. And of course, I brought up the Stacey Abrams thing earlier. What Barack Obama did, and this is really mostly Barack Obama that brought all this about. Like, we did some of this stuff prior to Obama's administration, but he weaponized this. Remember, I described earlier about Saul Alinsky and scamming banks and corporations to give them a bunch of money to operate their organization and make it stronger and push back more against institutions. Barack Obama put that on steroids because the concept of the NGO, by the way, is a UN concept. We didn't give money to so-called NGOs in the United States in any major degree prior to, say, the 1960s. The reason is because of the potential corruption. The UN has given money to NGOs because it's been a corrupt institution almost from the beginning. And it's a slush fund that they throw around to favored individuals who will do something, but then they don't really make it go through. They keep the money for themselves. They give these money to, like, for instance, with the Ukraine situation, you're sending them supplies. So you're spending the money here, and then it goes, and then the equipment or whatever goes over there. Meantime, the companies to which the material or items are being bought are owned lock, stock, and barrel by the politicians that are using that company and dumping the money into it, or getting kickbacks, or they end up on the board of that company at a later date. The question is what everyone is yelling about. We're fine with the fact that you're chastising the left for what they've done and you're calling them out, but when are we going to be seeing somebody held accountable? When are we going to see someone in handcuffs? When is, like, I love the show. Don't get me wrong. I love the show. But the average American that's probably in a jail cell or a prison cell right now has not done 10% of what we're seeing happen in front of our Correct.
face.
You're absolutely correct.
And we don't see anything happen. And it's just disheartening.
Yeah, listen, Pam Bondi better get her act together. Let me just say that right now. The rollout of the Epstein files was absurdly bad. And a lot of Americans are, and I'm not trying to dump her off to the side right now. And some are wanting to, and I'm not gonna
listen. I have more of the Epstein files, like, right now than she released.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but not only that, there need to be indictments forthcoming, like, quick. If she wants to resurrect what she's doing, then she needs to really get aggressive. She needs to, and I don't know what she's doing with Kash Patel right now, but she should not be trying to tie his hands. I do have at this stage a lot of confidence still in Kash Patel, but they better get going, because there is very real concern that people who have done criminal things with government need to be held accountable quickly. And because if we do not get moving on this, we've likely got a 2-year window. And hopefully, if Republicans keep Congress as bad as they are, we may have a 4-year window to clean this up. But it's going to take every bit of that time to get it done. And they better be aggressive quickly, because we have to pull from the root all this rot out of government if we want any hope past the Trump administration this time.
Exactly right. And I'm going to touch on that in just a second. I want to take a quick break. This is good. I love this. We'll be right back.
Welcome to Shop with America, where the emphasis is on America. Our movement is to switch away from your shopping with the big box stores and the mega corporations back to supporting family-owned, made in America. We've been giving these big box stores our money every day for years. But what's happened is they've forced many small businesses to shut down. We call this the illusion of choice. We see all these products in these stores, but in reality, it's only a few companies that control it all. There are thousands of lawsuits for health damage because they put profit over our people. But there is another choice. We found a better way. There's a family-owned American factory with product integrity and have always done things the right way for the right reasons. And this company outperforms the big box stores. That's due to their month-to-month shopping club. They make everyday consumer products that we all use and buy again and again, like toothpaste, shampoo, coffee, and organic beef. Go to shopwithamerica.us today.
Guys, if you're America first, be America first. Go to shopwithamerica.com. Stop giving China and the big box stores all your money. Support American manufacturing and American-made products today. Go get yours today at shopwithamerica.us. So you touched on something that is, I think, scares the hell out of most of us. The idea that when Biden first took office, he stayed locked in a room for like a week, they say, undoing all the Trump era policies and taking us further down the rabbit hole of socialism, which is eventual communism, than we've ever been in our lives. We've seen obvious wrongs. Our values were thrown in the trash. Our kids were under attack. Our women are under attack currently. If we don't keep these ideological radicals out of office and away from power, the country as we know it is done, because they are not afraid to cross every line that there is in the sand in order to do that. And as a free speech guy who makes his living telling the truth and going online, and this is what we do. I mean, we were censored. We were deplatformed in some cases. We were talking about vaccine mandates and the fact that, you know, what happened to the guys in the military and all, and getting strikes. Facebook demonetized us over a long period of time. We weren't even allowed to stream on Facebook for almost a year for things that were obviously true, and we were right, but no one's held accountable for that. We have to make sure that the left doesn't get back in power immediately, because I see it like this. If your canoe rocks to the right and then it rocks back to the left, if it rocks again, it's flipping over. And that's really where we're at. And I think people, and I don't mean to fearmonger, but this is true. This is obviously true. I think that if Donald Trump is done with his administration and we don't win that next election, I don't know what America looks like at that point.
We're not entirely out of the woods yet. We're far from it. We're in a great place right now. We're in a great place to get out of the woods. We're in a great situation to extract the evil that has been plaguing us for 50, 60 years. And if we don't take advantage of it, we're going to revert. Now, I have some hope that that's not going to be the case. Donald Trump, I have a very strong, actually, belief that he's going to follow through on what he's doing. The problem is to structurally change it all. We have to do that in Congress. And that's going to require as dramatic a shift in the people we have serving in that institution as we have now with Donald Trump winning his second term. So it's going to take a lot of work and effort. It's going to take a huge pushback amongst the American people, because there are not enough Republicans in Congress right now who believe in America and the American ideal and are willing to be as courageous as Donald Trump. They just don't line up. Now, there are a few good things that have happened. For example, Mike Johnson, who I've been criticizing from when he first became speaker.
Had such high hopes for that guy.
He deserves that criticism, but he's beholden to Donald Trump for his speakership right now. He would not have it if Johnson would not have the speakership if it had not been for the efforts of Donald Trump to encourage members to vote for him. And I think that he understands that. The House actually is a brighter light by comparison than the Senate by far, even with the credit that I'll give John Thune to pushing through many of these nominees. We needed to do that. He needed to make that happen. And I'm glad that he did. But that vote that I referenced earlier with Rand Paul's amendment, that's evidence that the rot is pretty deep over there. And it's fairly deep in the House, but the House seems to be coming into line. They seem to have gotten the idea that, okay, we're going to be pro-Trump, and they're so far doing that, even with a slimmer majority. So hopefully they can keep that up. But again, we're far from out of the woods. 2026 is going to be a pivotal year, another pivotal election in American history.
Yeah, Turning Point is trying to go into Wisconsin right now and move votes and do and I love the grassroots effort, because I think for far too long the left has had these catchphrases and groups that people could move, a movement, if you will, right or wrong or indifferent. They do mobilize. They're in front of the DMV getting petitions signed. They do all of the groundwork, right, wrong, or indifferent. But for far too long, the right has not moved into that space. And now finally, with someone as polarizing as Donald Trump in this MAGA movement, we're seeing like a resurgence. I like to tell people the Republicans don't have the majority, MAGA does. And there is a difference, right? Because it's
a huge difference.
We don't term ourselves Republicans. We term ourselves conservatives, because I don't want to be beholden to a political party. I want to be beholden to my values. And is the Conservative Caucus is, if you could explain the mission statement of what you guys are trying to do as a group, how would you classify yourselves as a whole?
Well, we're the nation's oldest conservative grassroots organization. We were founded in 1974 by Howard Phillips, one of the key players in the early post-Goldwater era conservative movement that really supported making Ronald Reagan president. Our grassroots has been a foundation to what we do. So what we are going to do, we're rebuilding out all of our state organizations. We have some representation in 39 states. We're quickly expanding that. I just brought on Chad Caton. Many people that are on X Spaces know who Chad Caton is. He's our national field director. He ran Veterans for Trump. Chad and I are working to really get our state organizations lined up, make sure the people that are in there are good, or go find someone that can lead that. And we want to do state by state efforts to change things around. We're also kind of looking at various election integrity efforts. And one of those we want to do is be aggressive at getting voter rolls cleaned up in these states. That's a huge issue that doesn't just affect mail voting. And FYI, I would eliminate mail voting. There will be some form of absentee ballot available, because there are some people that are incapacitated or traveling.
Or yeah, exactly. You either got health problems, or you're not in the country and you're fighting for your country. And it needs to be very strict. Acceptable.
It needs to be very strict. It needs to have a signed affidavit under penalty of law type thing. So that should be strict. But mail voting is unsolicited mail ballots. We need to get rid of that. But until we can get rid of that in every state, at least clean the voter rolls, because it's so easy for someone in another state to go ahead and vote, and they have no right to. And and that can be taken advantage of. We need to get rid of vote gathering. California allows vote gathering under any circumstance. So you can go in and have a large
ballot harvesting?
Huh?
Are you talking about ballot harvesting?
Yeah. Okay. That's vote gathering.
Nevada does too. Nevada does too.
And when you this is one of the things that Democrats did in elections. They worked hard to have these long election periods, because, some people just can't get there on election day, and we need to make sure everybody can vote. Well, there's another nefarious reason before that, and California is one of the worst states in it. When you have unlimited ballot harvesting, over, say, a 40 or 60-day period, well, then you have a long time for a grassroots organization to effort to go in and encourage people to vote a certain way while you're standing right in front of them. This was the reason we always had election day voting. So
Or they buy ballots.
Huh?
Or they buy ballots, which
that's true.
we have plenty of evidence of. They were paying $5 to $10 a piece for ballots. And we have the people who were actually doing it on record saying that's exactly what they were doing.
This is really critical stuff. We do need to change our elections, and we're not going to entirely change it through 2026. So I tell people, you've got to be focused entirely on following the laws in your state and doing everything you legally can do in your state, just like the Democrats are doing. But then, that's on election day. Then we can change it up later by changing laws, which we do need to do. That does need to happen. But anyway, so we're going to be involved in election integrity. We're going to have people on the ground doing the work that they need to do so that we can help to make 2026 effective. And then beyond that, as an organization, we're in a media effort. We're going to inform not only grassroots people how to do grassroots, but make sure we're informing them on the Constitution and what it really means. Not going into all of the, like a lot of legal analysis would be, well, this is the judicial history of this amendment and how it's come. No. We want to talk about the Constitution in plain language, what it actually means. We certainly want to make some historical reference, and certainly from time to time, it's important to understand the jurisprudence that's happened, but not to understand the jurisprudence, but to get to the plain language and see what really did need to happen and teach people how to implement that.
The truth is very simple. Lies are complicated. And this is something that the left has done well. They've complicated the truth.
Yeah.
And they a lot of times explain the truth as a lie. I mean, it's very tricky the way that they use language. It's extremely tricky. But let me ask you a last question here. You guys have a president in Arizona, I assume.
We do. It's a nascent one at present, but we're working to build it.
Because that is, in my estimation, the worst state.
It is.
I used to think it was Chicago, but now, having had FaceTime and interviewing Liz Harris and Jerome Davison's a friend of the network, and knowing some of the ins and outs of what took place and the Carrie Lake conversation that was leaked between her and Jeff DeWitt is extremely telling.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so,
and a quick interruption on that. No one should think that your state GOP organization is at all going to be friendly to you. There are a handful that maybe are friendly to MAGA people who are constitutionalists, but by and large, they're as corrupt as anything you see in Washington, D.C. DeWitt's thing being part of that. Go ahead. So sorry.
Yeah, no, we need to back people like Jerome Davison, who's fighting an uphill battle against his own party. And you wouldn't think that you would have that, but there were definite examples of corruption in that state, and it was brought forth by a company called Thaler and Harris, who did the investigation and proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that cartel members were paying members of our legislation and giving them payouts. And Hobbs was caught up in that. Now she's avoiding reporters, running down hallways, doesn't want to answer questions, and I'm hoping that the corruption is sought out and it is definitely prosecuted. And that's what we're all hoping for.
Listen, I lived in Arizona from 2000 to 2005 before I moved to Colorado Springs to work for Focus on the Family in 2005. I love Arizona. I was just back in Arizona recently for the Goldwater Institute banquet. Barry Goldwater Jr. is on our honorary chairman.
And I used to love watching, the old Barry Goldwater speeches. And I mean, it was before my time. Well, I say I was very, very young at Barry Goldwater's day.
Yeah.
But as just a guy who loves the country and loves the history of this country, I enjoyed very much seeing those speeches and learning what this guy stood for. And it's disappointing that he never got to realize that and actually implement some of the things.
I'm convinced he would have been a fantastic president
Yeah,
and could have stopped, and we would have never heard of the Great Society. Like, it was bad at that time, but had he been able to stop Lyndon Johnson from becoming president, we wouldn't be in nearly as bad a situation as we are right now. It might have gotten bad, but Barry Jr. too. I mean, he's been faithful to what his father's precepts and concepts are. When he was a congressman, he was quite excellent. So, and we're proud to have him there. But anyway, we have a stake in wanting to see Arizona go well. I have a personal stake because I still have lots of friends there. I was driving down 202 out almost to Apache Junction because I lived way out there in Lascendis at Power and McDowell. I love that area. It's a beautiful state in so many ways. There are lots of good people there. You know, my friend Andy Biggs, it looks like he's going to run for governor. He could be really good there. I don't know how that's going to shake out yet, but there's a real opportunity in Arizona to get things back in shape, and it could happen. John McCain harmed that state so badly because
am I glad to hear you say that.
On the Republican Party.
I had Matt Kinney on a few months ago, who was the GOP chair for a while in that state, and it was a friendly debate, but it was a debate nonetheless that we went down when he started defending John McCain, because it was the guy, to me, threw the election. He threw it.
Well, and I spent a lot of years doing politics in Colorado, back when it was still really a purple, slightly red state. 2005, as I mentioned, is when I got in there. I ran the marriage amendment effort in 2006 there in overwhelming odds. That was a blue year. Democrats were winning all over the country. Of course, this concept of the blueprint had been implemented in Colorado to take Republican control from the legislature there. I fought the blueprint and won big, being outspent 6-1, just doing the things that I was talking to you about earlier that we need to start doing. But Colorado went downhill, not just because some Californians moved in there, and all that has an effect, but the way you win those things is by having solid conservative efforts to assert American principles. And the Republican Party there has been in a shambles for years, and that's the biggest reason we've lost Colorado up to this point. And Arizona has gone downhill for the same reasons. There have been some bright lights in there. Kelly Ward for a little bit was chairman or whatever, but you have these real problems that exist because the party structure stinks. We need to be the party structure ourselves. MAGA needs to be the party structure in their states. And certainly if you want to work with the Republican Party, I guess you can, but you still need to have something going on that's not run by the Republican Party, because in most states, they're useless organizations.
And it's funny. The two-party system anymore seems to me like to be a four-party system, because on the right, you have the establishment style globalists, and you have your constitutional conservatives. And on the left, well, I would say you have the socialist, Marxist, just far to the left folks. And then you have the more moderate, but I don't think they have any moderates anymore. If they had moderates, they would have been clapping for DJ.
No, they haven't for a long period of time.
And it's sad. All right, so I'm sorry, I kept you well beyond our time, so I'm gonna let you have your final word here, and we'll sign off.
Well, I just want to say to everyone who's listening, we really do have a chance of reasserting the American ideal. I want to encourage everyone, even in MAGA world, people that are conservatives that believe in the Constitution still. I want to encourage you, do your homework, read the Constitution regularly. Like, just read the Constitution one time through every month. Very easy to do because it's really, really short. It'd be really good for you to take some time and think about what this really means, because you're going to find out how poorly Washington, D.C. really, really understands it. In fact, I would say that most congressmen on Capitol Hill have never read the Constitution. Mm-hmm. I mean, Thomas Massie gets a lot of grief, and I know there are a couple areas maybe where, okay, you can give him grief.
Ron Paul got a lot of grief, and he was very good with it.
But what I can say about both of those guys, particularly Thomas, because he's a friend and I worked with him, the guy reads the Constitution regularly. Like, if Thomas Massie will read the Constitution regularly, why won't you? Because it's really short. But here's the reason I'm saying that is this: we can grab our country back. You need to understand what the country is, because there is no United States without the Constitution. For good, bad, indifferent, the Constitution is the United States of America, with all the ideals laid out in the Declaration of Independence, which you should also read. Those two things are fundamental to your understanding of why you're even excited about Donald Trump and wanting to get involved. It should motivate you in the future, because Donald Trump's not going to be able to do it for you in the future. You're going to have to pick it up yourself. So do that. And I want to encourage everyone. We want to give the resources to people to help you really get this down and to move forward, and then turn that knowledge into action where you live. So we have an entire grassroots center on our website. If you do the sign up link at the top right of theconservativecaucus.org, and bring yourself into our organization, at least get our emails and see what we're doing and what we're about. And then utilize the resources online right now for you to learn how to do what you need to do in your area. We've got abundant ones there. We got new ones coming online all the time. So go to theconservativecaucus.org. And for everyone watching, just spell my first name that you see there below me, at Jim Pfaff on X, and follow what I'm saying. I'm trying to put light on these things for you and help you understand. I spend a lot of time working in Washington, D.C., working outside of it. I've got a lot of understanding and know all the players, and I'm trying to get that knowledge to you, not to beef me up for having done it, but to help you understand better and get some insights into it. That's my goal, and I hope to do that. But theconservativecaucus.org.
Guys, and as always, and Jim, stick around for a second when we're done here. I want to talk to you just a second. But as always, at the end of every show, I say this, and I mean it. The silent majority, you need to stop being silent and stand your ground. Evil will never retreat willingly. It must be beaten back in every case. Guys, have a great day, and we'll see you next time on the Patriots Prayer. Have a great one.
This is the Patriots Prayer Podcast. It's a tremendous show, one of the greatest shows in the history of the world.
This is Bryson Gray, and you are watching the Patriots Prayer.
PP, and you're doing the right thing.
On the Patriots Prayer Network. Thank you all.